How you doing, everyone? I wanted to go over a quick video on explaining what I did to my black Mustang that prevents it from doing the dreaded Mustang crowd killer move. So I'm just gonna show you the few parts you really need to fix that on your own Mustang. So the first thing I wanted to cover is the subframe bushings. Now, particularly on the S550 Mustang chassis, which is 2015 and newer, they come with a very, very large bushing for the subframe with a huge hole in the center. What ends up happening essentially with all of the issues with the preload and unload, like I described in other videos, is the more you have play, the more you have a chance of loading up and then unloading. So the first thing you need to get is the insert, which goes inside that little center hole, which basically lines up your whole subframe so it's actually properly attached. And additionally to that, you're gonna want a lockout or a firmer bushing. Now, the next problem with the S550 Mustang is the differential. That's debatably could be the worst issue versus the subframe, is when you load up the rear end or floor it, the whole rear end starts to torque in one direction, and the split second you lift the throttle, it unloads, which essentially causes the rest of the suspension to move in an opposite direction, which is causing the flip. So the next step is you want to upgrade your differential bushings. The reason for mine doing it wasn't actually for the loading up and unloading. For me, it was actually because my stock diff bushings shattered, producing a little bit over 1,100 foot-pounds of torque to this rear end, broke them in the first 50 miles of having the turbo kit. The next point is going to be what's called your Camber I-link, which is right here. I've updated that with a polyurethane version. So this is a thicker billet arm with polyurethane bushings installed from BMR, and that is also going to reduce the amount of loading and unloading of the rear end. Now, of course, with the entire rear end, I do have adjustable tow arms and camber arms, which also have the polyurethane bushings, but those affect it a little bit less. The last thing, which unfortunately I can't show you, is probably the best mod you can do on pretty much any rear-wheel drive car, which is updating to a clutch type LSD. Now, the S550 Mustang comes with a Torsen type LSD. Those are great, and there's no problem with them. I'm not saying there's an issue with them, but the whole point of this video is correcting the snap oversteer, which ends up happening when you floor it and then lift it. And the biggest issue with Torsen differentials is they don't lock the wheels 50-50. They will actually wobble back and forth. So sometimes they'll be locking this 40% 60 and 60-40, 20-70 back and forth. They are locking both the rear wheels, but it's not a true 50-50 split. And also, unloading the rear end will actually unlock the differential altogether, so it'll turn it into a one-way LSD. So the Torsen only truly locks under power. Now, this vehicle has an OS Geiken 1.5 way, so it locks 50-50 under power, and it locks 50-50 without power, however, to a lesser degree. So I believe it's only halfway locked, but it still is super predictable. And that is essentially the number one thing you want in any vehicle, is you want predictability. Even if you could argue in the comments saying that some of these components are actually superior in their factory forms, that may be true. However, in practice, it doesn't quite work that well, as unfortunately the Mustang name comes from. Now, the flip side to all of this is why Ford did this. Now, some of you could argue without understanding and say, well, it's because Ford doesn't know how to do it. Well, no, it actually was for a reasoning. The biggest problem I have now after doing all the modifications I did to my black car is the road noise. And that's essentially the reasoning for any vehicle to have very soft, malleable suspension bushings. It's for comfort. Because they had to use such large differentials, such a large drive shaft, such a large axles, all those things add a lot of vibration to the drivetrain. So the engineers had to add softer, bigger bushings. In factory form, you drive a bone stock S550 Mustang, they're actually pretty darn quiet and for what they are and the price point they are, they're actually pretty damn comfortable. So those are the main things you want to do when you want to reduce the actual flick oversteer, understeer, whatever you want to call it, basically the 180 spin these cars like to do. Those are the peak things you want to do. Now, if you like this video, I'm going to make another one on how to fix bump steer on these vehicles and a few other things. And also, if you're interested, how to make these a true drift car.